My father was a shooter.
What happened?
My father was a shooter.
What happened?
He shot my family, and he's dead now.
On February 16th, 2026, a pretty normal high school hockey game in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, suddenly became the scene of an absolutely horrific shooting. Today, we're going to unpack this tragedy because it's a really complex story of domestic violence that spiraled into a national flashpoint for the culture wars. Okay, let's just dive right in. This quote from someone who was there, it perfectly captures the absolute confusion inside that arena. You know, one minute it's the familiar sounds of a hockey game, and the next it's just pure chaos and terror. So let's break down exactly what happened. We're going to look at the sequence of events as they unfolded right there in the stands in front of dozens of people. What this timeline shows is just how fast everything went down. There was no argument, no big confrontation beforehand, just a sudden burst of gunfire. And right in the middle of that pandemonium, a bystander makes this incredible split-second decision to lunge at the shooter. It was an act of heroism that, without a doubt, saved more lives. Now, this was not a random act of violence, not at all. To really understand what happened here, you have to see that this was a targeted attack that just ripped a single family apart. And this right here, it makes the devastating reality crystal clear. The two people killed were the shooter's own ex-wife and adult son. 3 other people, including the ex-wife's parents, were left in critical condition. It's why police very quickly classified this as what it was, a terrible act of domestic violence, a familicide. And amidst all that horror, we find another moment of just unbelievable bravery.
What we learned was that there was an individual suspect inside Lynch Arena that had fired upon family members. What I can confirm now is that the suspect was Robert Dorgan. His date of birth is July 15th of 1969. One of the victims was his ex-wife, Rhonda Dorgan, and also his son, adult son Aiden Dorgan. Rhonda succumbed to her injuries on scene at Lynch Arena, and the son Aiden succumbed to his injuries after being transported to the hospital. They were all at the event for a juvenile son who was playing hockey. It was their senior night, and there was no expectations or any indication that there was going to be any type of violence yesterday at the arena. I can tell you that individuals on site, several bystanders, I would say that probably whether they have been family or friends of the individuals playing hockey, stepped in. They intervened. At that time, the suspect did reach for a second firearm, and he did inflict a self-inflicted gunshot wound, which is what he succumbed to on scene. Obviously, the investigation is ongoing. We continue to look into maybe what the motivation was. We're not sure at this point what the trigger event was that happened yesterday. We are conducting several search warrants at this time, looking for additional information. We have reviewed several videos, both internally because it was a sporting event, so Live Bond was streaming that event for the families.
This tragedy is part of a broader national crisis of gun violence and stark reminder of devastating consequences of domestic violence.
Eyewitnesses reported that 25-year-old Aiden Dorgan died while trying to shield his own mother from the bullets. It was his final, selfless act. So, the big question is, how? How could something like this possibly happen? Well, to even begin to understand, we have to look into the perpetrator's background. And what it reveals is a really troubled and, frankly, contradictory history. Police identified the shooter as Roberta Dorgan, a 56-year-old trans woman. She'd had a pretty varied work history, a very brief time in the Marines, a job as a truck driver, and most recently, she was working at Bath Iron Works up in Maine. But you know, when you start looking at court documents and statements from her own daughter, they paint a picture of years of really intense conflict. Her daughter mentioned a long history of violence and abuse, and the records show all these legal fights within the family, including some pretty serious allegations of threats that were tied directly to her gender transition. And this quote, this gives you a raw look into that personal turmoil. In a 2020 divorce filing, her ex-wife Rhonda had initially written down gender reassignment surgery, narcissistic plus personality disorder traits as the reason for the split. Now, that was later crossed out and just replaced with irreconcilable differences, but it really gives you a glimpse into the fractures inside that family. This complexity just got deeper when you look online. Investigators found this really disturbing digital footprint that was just full of contradictions. She apparently had an SS tattoo. That's the insignia of the Nazi paramilitary wing, and she posted pro-Nazi stuff online. She also expressed support for Donald Trump, but at the same time, she pushed back against the idea that all trans people were liberals. And then there's this, a truly chilling tweet from the day before the shooting. "Keep bashing us, but do not wonder why we go berserk." The attack itself was over in minutes, but of course, the aftermath was just beginning. So let's take a look at how officials and the community started to respond. So the law enforcement response was, as you'd expect, massive. A really critical detail is that the ATF traced the 2 handguns used in the attack and found they had both been purchased legally. Later searches up in Maine turned up a small arsenal of other weapons. And at the same time, local leaders were moving fast to get mental health resources to this completely traumatized community. And that community, it just responded with this huge outpouring of grief. People held vigils, and a makeshift memorial of flowers and hockey sticks started to grow outside the arena. It was this powerful symbol of a town just deep in mourning. But here's where the story takes a major turn. While Pawtucket was mourning, this deeply personal family tragedy was absolutely exploding onto the national stage, and it became an instant flashpoint in the culture wars. I mean, just look at this divide. Locally, the response was laser-focused on the facts. This was about domestic violence. The mayor called it a stark reminder of the consequences of domestic violence. But online, a completely different firestorm erupted, and it was centered almost entirely on the shooter's gender identity. Commentators immediately jumped on the tragedy to claim things like transgender people are violent and a danger to society. That online narrative, though, it runs directly opposite to the actual data. And this context is so important. While any event like this is a tragedy, one analysis looked at nearly 6,000 mass shootings over a 12-year span and found only 5 involved transgender perpetrators. That's less than 0.1%. But that statistical reality, it was almost completely missing from the really heated online debate. And so, we're left with this question. This was a story about domestic violence, about a long history of family conflict, about extremist ideology. And it all ended in a horrific murder-suicide. Yet for so many people, it was immediately reframed through the single, narrow lens of gender identity. It really forces us to ask, in our polarized digital age, when a family's worst nightmare becomes a national headline, who actually gets to write the story?
Just one day before he opened fire, he was defending trans Congresswoman Sarah McBride. He wrote this in part on X: "Keep bashing us, but do not wonder why we go berserk." So they're looking into all of these things on social media. As investigators say, it was a targeted attack. That's one thing they know for sure. Sources telling Fox it was a dispute within this family that led to the tragedy. So the gunman shows up, kills his ex-wife and one of his own kids at the hockey game. Police say 3 others are in the hospital fighting for their lives. And there really could have been more people that were killed, but a good Samaritan stepped in and tried to take this gunman down. Watch.
Police were on scene within a minute and a half of that call. A good Samaritan stepped in and interjected in this scene, and that's probably what led to a swift end of this tragic event.
And so what we know right now is that the mayor has said so far, Bill, they've interviewed dozens, maybe more than 100 people. They're going to look at all the different video and piece this together. The question is, how many weapons did this gunman have? We know at least one, and it could have been a lot worse if this other person at the game wouldn't have stepped in and taken that shooter down. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Sure, yeah, and all caught on camera too.
Terrible.
Alexis, thank you for that.
And Paul Morrow is still with us. Can you give us a sense of, well, I know that you're a hockey guy.
Yeah.
You grew up on the rink, your nephews play on the rink, and it's hard for all parents to watch what happened.
Yeah, very, very tough. I would say a couple of things. There's some reporting that he had more than one gun. I go to the guns because one of the things we always hear is red flag laws, all right? People who are mentally ill, and by the way, strong Second Amendment advocates agree with that. Crazy people shouldn't have guns. That's how somebody recently put it to me, who's very active in that community. This person, by their own daughter's statements after this event, was severely mentally ill and yet had these weapons. And, you know, look, not all trans people are shooters. Nobody is saying that. But at some point, we're going to have to accept the evidence here that there's something going on with the medication that is involved in transitioning that creates this kind of anger and disassociation. And I'm sorry, but the fact that you have red flag laws means that you need to use them. And this guy very clearly was telegraphing in bright red lights. Problem. I'd like to know if the guns were legal, how we got them. That should be a line of inquiry here.
Fair questions. Thank you, Paul. This is coming a couple days after the situation in British Columbia, Canada, too,
right.
with an 18-year-old. Thank you, Paul, and welcome back here, okay?
Thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to